Hey guys, Anthrid Stormrider here, another episode of The Bloody Point. This is in the category of deep cuts, where we're going to spend a little more time than usual on a subject. In this case, I want to talk about perception versus reality. In the context of Crowfall, that has a very specific meaning. First of all, perception. Look at this Ganetian. Isn't he cute? You know, whenever I want to show Crowfall to one of my female friends, I always start with the Ganetian. Just adorable. Little animation for the harvesting he's got. I don't know, Doggett, Dave, I don't know who worked on this, but they did a great job. It's really definitely an eye grabber. So yes, perception versus reality. You know, one of the things that we have to deal with the Prealpha is, and it's tough for the developers too, is showing the public the game in progress. And it's not a great example of how it's going to be in release. Obviously there are bugs, in some cases there are unfinished features. You know, you don't want people basing their opinion, especially when it comes to their opinion or decision to buy, on unfinished or incomplete versions of your final product, but there are advantages to having people see things from the very foundation up. Prospective buyers get to see things happen in real time. In some cases they get to interact with the developers and perhaps influence design or development. And that's an important part of creating a strong foundation in terms of your fan base, your customer base. But, you know, there are downsides, of course, as we're all aware. But in Crowfall's case, you know, because it's such a competitive game, a deep game, a rich game, the new player experience can give a very harmful perception of the game. For example, in the context of the early game where you have to create everything from scratch, you know, your tools, your basic weapons, and so on. The recent change of requiring dust for everything is somewhat of a gate for people, and you'll see often in the in-game chat or on the forums people complaining about the rate of dust drops. So here you look at the percentage that I've got for dust, and it's 0. For Knotwood, I have no training on this account, and we're going to see an example here of just how often dust drops with no rune applied, no potion, no training. So here we go. I have 1 tree, I got a couple apples, 3 wood, no dust. So this is a good example of a new player's experience. You know, new player's not going to have any training, they're not going to have rune tools, they're not going to know about the potions. This is what they're going to see, this is what they're going to experience, and this is going to create the perception of how hard it is to get from having nothing to having those first few items that require dust. We'll do another tree here, just to give an example, good baseline, so it's not a fluke. You know, of course, RNG is a big factor in Crowfall as well, and perception is a big part of that. If you're, you know, unlucky enough to have a bad string of failures, whether it be in harvesting or crafting, you're going to have a perception that's not going to match the guy who got lucky and had a good string. So harvesting wood, of course, to be able to create the other tools. Need the hammer, you're going to need the pick as well in order to create the potion and the rune, which will increase the dust drop rate. Those, of course, requiring 2 each of the basic resources. Another thing is that, you know, a lot of players are not going to know about the rune or the potion. They've been provided to us by the devs to increase the drop rate, but if you don't know about them, you're not going to create them, and then that further will influence your perception. You're going to think, well, is this really how the first hour, 2 or 3 of my game is going to be? Fortunately, you know, we have the community to help guide people. People in chat will guide other new players into these early steps, but you know, some of the people we see attracted to Crowfall are not the type to ask questions, and they just make statements about how hard things are, and you know, they're spreading the perception that things are worse than they seem, and that's something we see throughout Crowfall. Whether it's, you know, the crafting and the harvesting in the early game or early combat, many times you'll hear or see players complain about how they can't take a fort, for example, by themselves, or they can't, they don't have a hope of beating somebody who's got a gear advantage on them. And in the latter case, that's certainly true. A new player with no skill training and basic gear is going to have a very hard time beating a veteran in advanced. But in the case of capturing forts, it's not an impossibility. In fact, using particular discipline runes and certain tactics, a new player with a basic weapon and zero combat training can easily capture a fort solo. In fact, you don't even have to attack the guards very much. As I've mentioned in previous videos, bringing the right tool is 90% of success in Crowfall. And in the case of fort capturing, particular classes with specific runes and very specific powers can allow you to solo cap it extremely easily. And in the case of this current build 5.5, where crafting is a gate to later gameplay because you can no longer acquire certain things without the use of the crafting tables. Even if you have the training, if your faction for whatever reason has not captured anything on the map that you're on, well then you're going to be out of luck when it comes to crafting items. So capturing a fort is important, and knowing how to do that is equally important. And it's a particular problem that we see with the Prealpha because the game's not out, so there aren't a huge array of resources and guides and so on. Some things do exist, but once again, the issue is players having to avail themselves of them, and they don't always do that. In any case, perception is often harsher than the reality, and that's something that I think we're going to have to deal with for a while until everybody's educated. So back to the dust gathering here. I have acquired the resources necessary to make the rune and the potion. We're going to see an increase of drop rate very shortly. There's different strategies now in the early game. Different players have different opinions on what's the best method of gathering dust. For myself, I like wood, simply because, chopping wood rather, because you get the wood and the food byproducts, which you'll need as well. So here we go. We're going to apply Ethereal Sight, which is a basic ritual, and it's actually a minor rune that you can apply. I'm going to put that in there, slot that, and we're going to see a 5% increase in dust drop for knotwood. I'm going to refresh my stats here in a moment, and you'll be able to see that. Of course, I have to slot the passive. One thing to note for new players is that you don't only need to slot the passive, but you also have to have the tool out. Once the tool is out, the basic tool is equipped, you'll see the change. So there we go. I have a 5% now dust drop rate, and we should see results right away in terms of an increase. Previously we're getting no dust per tree pretty much all the time. With this 5% bump, we should see an improvement in the drop rate. So let's see if that turns out to be the case. First tree, no dust. Okay, that's RNG. That's going to happen. Let's try the second one. Making sure everything is good. Cleaning up my inventory. Speaking of perception, you want things to look neat. Alright, second tree. Once that's been equipped, you should see an improvement. It's interesting. One of the things that I like about Crowfall is that you really can have a wide range of impact or effect based on your choices. Now, choice is great when you have all the information available to you, but as we know, some people don't, so they can't make choices when they don't know what the options are. I'm not sure how far the devs need to handhold players when it comes to giving them that information. We've recently had some really great tutorial videos made available to players. They're linked right from the lobby. You can go right in there, watch those. But we all of us who play anyway, we know many times players don't bother doing that. It's not just about the devs providing the tools. The players have to be inquisitive, they have to follow the little breadcrumbs that are out there, and I don't know how much the devs can do ultimately for some players. Okay, so I've drank the potion, now I'm up to 10%. let's see if this helps. 10% is a good number. You're going to get, typically, in my experience at least, 1 or 2 per tree, which will add up. You can increase that, of course, with skill training, and over time get up there to 20, 25, 30, all the way up to 40% if you train everything. But 10% is sufficient. So I haven't gotten any yet. Again, RNG. What can you do? Of course, my axe is going to break, but I believe I will get one. There we go. There's one. Another thing that new players don't often know about is the use of the pips when harvesting, the harvesting powers. Those really help as well. Again, perception. Players complain about running out of stamina way too quickly, too easily, but they're not using the stamina return power on the bar there. The solution, I don't know, maybe pop-ups on the screen. Crowfall has a lot of pop-up fly text. In a lot of games, they have interface elements that only exist when you're doing some kind of a tutorial. Perhaps Crowfall needs to make things a bit more obvious in that respect. I don't know. I mean, they'll figure it out eventually. The question is, how many casualties will there be throughout the first hour or two of your gameplay? We've seen already people quit, just stop playing. I don't know, maybe those players are better off quitting. Crowfall is going to be a very difficult game. It's going to be hardcore in some respects, certainly with the full loot PvP environment that will be experienced in some of the campaigns. And it's very clear that some players are not suited for that. We do need all types of players in Crowfall. There are people who are never going to see a day of combat, and that's fine. Crafters and gatherers are extremely important, but even if they have that kind of career planned for them in their mind, that they know they're never going to PvP, if the early game is harsh in their estimation, then they may not even ever get to that. They may not go down the crafting or gathering road. They just won't play. So hopefully, we in the community, like I was referencing in a previous video, creating content, we're also creating experience for the players by sharing our knowledge. Speaking of knowledge, I like to slot the logger and survivalist runes when grinding dust in early game. Again, you're going to get food and wood while doing that, and both of those things have utility early game. Food is extremely useful. You're always going to need that. And wood can be used, of course, in the early game for crafting the basic items. It's also useful for sacrificing. If you want to level up your vessel, you can create basic items that are composed only of wood. So shields, for example, are extremely good for that. Or just sacrifice the stacks of wood directly, which is something a lot of players have recently, gone to doing, not wasting the time on crafting. There is a small difference in XP you get from crafted items versus resources, but it is very small, and it's probably not worth the time spent to craft the items. Okay, so I've got the potion on, the dust potion, I believe. Yes, it's still got some time on it. I have the rune. I have logger on, which is meaning I'm only having to hit something once to get a pip for harvesting. That's going to help. And I'm going to put survivalist on pretty soon now. So the dust rate's increased. I got one off the last tree. I'm going to get some more here, and that'll speed things up considerably. You need dust for discipline runes. You need it for the intermediate and advanced gear. And there's one in the terrain. This was fixed, sort of, in a recent build update. It still happens on occasion, happens less often. This too, I believe, will be fixed soon. The dubers popping up on top of things. It's frustrating sometimes when you see something nice and you have no way to get at it. Yes, so see, I've got 5 dust there, and this didn't take that much time. Really, without the backtracking and whatnot. If you go directly to your tools, to your rune, to your potion, to your disciplines, you're going to be getting enough dust in the first half an hour to make the necessary equipment, which, that's the reality. But you compare that to the perception of some players. I see on the forums people talking about having harvested for 2-3 hours and got dust in the single digits, and that's simply not accurate. Sure, it's accurate to their experience, but it's not accurate to what's actually happening, and that's a problem. We need to find a way to prevent those players from having that bad experience and having that bad perception. And some of it's education, some of it might be in-game mechanics, tutorials and guides and more obvious indicators, but that's a problem. Having dust in the game, some people have spoken about it and said that it's a bad thing since it's required for everything. Personally, I see that as a good thing because dust is something even the unskilled can harvest in mass quantities. And those people can then sell that to the more advanced players, the people who are making the gear and so on, and get themselves a foot in the economy, participate in the economy, get things they need that they can't make themselves. And that's hugely important. And that's something we're going to see more of. In the current test, we're seeing a real economy created in real time now. It's pretty interesting. And dust is a part of that, and it's a part that the new players can play as well, and that's important. Crowfall's endgame crafting does require less advanced materials throughout the crafting schools, and I suspect it's not by accident. It's more a case of careful design, one meant to involve all levels of player regardless of capability. And that's a great system. There's a pyramid there, and the pyramid space is pretty wide, and just about anybody can harvest dust, harvest white quality premium materials, and all these things, raw materials that the crafters are going to need. We're going to see more of that in the coming weeks. There are some of that going on now, but once certain processes are added to the game and certain things are automated, that's really going to blow up, and it's going to be exciting. There's a lot of players I know who I've introduced to Crowfall who aren't interested so much in the PvP. They're more looking forward to the crafting game, the EK game, the social aspect, and we're seeing that now. We have various vendors set up and shops that are being run by people, and they're seeing a lot of traffic. And that part of the game is a bit more complicated right now because the EK's Eternal Kingdoms are not open 24/7. You can't browse them easily to see who's selling what, and I'm not sure how far the game's mechanics are going to support that in terms of seeing vendor stock, for example, without going to the EK. The devs have mentioned they want people to walk up to the NPCs and browse and have that kind of immersive experience. They don't necessarily want to have the shop type of auction house type of experience. But there's some new content coming that'll help make it a bit easier for players to get what they need and to participate in the economy from both ends. So yeah, it's looking good. So now I have my survivalist on. You see what my dust is up to. I think my potion probably dropped. Yeah, it did. But I think we've seen enough here. You demonstrated the fact that with a little bit of effort, a little bit of knowledge, you can increase your dust drop rate and get through this part of the game much quicker than otherwise, and that's important. The early stage of the game, where you're punching, kicking, headbutting trees, it's novel, I suppose, but you don't want that part of the game to last any longer than absolutely necessary. You want players to be able to graduate to the basic tools as soon as possible. They've recently added intermediate tools, which are, in some cases, especially now, just as good as rune tools. And we want players to go up that ladder, to keep improving their gear. Intermediate tools are not super obvious to new players right now. You can make them without needing any premium stuff, but you have to use the crafting table in the fort. You have to know you can do that. You have to have your faction own a fort or a keep, and on some servers that's a difficulty right now. players are having trouble without the guidance of guilds or the game itself, bootstrapping themselves up in terms of capability from entry level to being fully functional, and that's even without crafting training or skill training, just in terms of being able to use the infrastructure. That's another problem. It's one I know they're aware of. It came up in a recent Q&A that new players in some cases are barricaded from things they need to play by not having the crafting infrastructure available to them. I don't know what the devs plan to do in that regard. It might not be a problem in release because the uneducated, not capable solo players, not really games being marketed towards. Certainly in the campaign worlds, you're going to have a lot of coordination there amongst players working together in guilds, and in some of the other rule sets, as a faction and whatnot, and that might be less of a problem. Right now the player population isn't that large, so getting the people you need together to take a fort, even though you can do it solo, as I said earlier, most people don't really know about that or know how. But you need people working together in sufficient numbers, and we just don't really see that currently. That'll come. The population numbers are kind of artificially restricted now for the servers due to a performance issue the devs are working out. That also again impacts perception of the game. People look at the numbers and see 20, 30 people on, and 30 people right now for those of us who know what's going on is good. That's a good number. People who are thinking of this as an MMO, focus on the massive part of it, the multiplayer part, that doesn't look so good. But growing pains, I think those issues will be addressed soon. We've had a few stress tests lately that have been a help in identifying the problem. And I expect in a week or two we'll see those population numbers increase significantly, and I'm looking forward to that. We've had a bunch of new things added. A lot of new content's been added to the game, but it's happened at a time that's unfortunate for the game, coinciding with various problems, performance issues. So we really haven't seen a full-fledged campaign gameplay loop under normal conditions since some of this content's been added. Certainly not in 5.5. A lot of guilds aren't playing, or they're playing on different servers, so they're not really together. It's again a case of the perception versus the reality. The perception is there's really no gameplay loop. There's really not a lot going on, but that's not entirely true. Reality is when things are really flowing and you have large groups of 20, 25, 30 players rolling around and contesting the map, it feels more like a game. Especially on this map, I think, with fewer forts and the resources distributed as they are in the adventure parcels, that's going to result in a lot more territorial conflict, which will be quite good, I think, for the perception for the new players who don't really understand what there is to do and how to do it, and they need, it's kind of like people who don't really know what to do. Oh, there's that 3 drop. See, now we're talking. People don't really know what to do, need an example, need to provide an example to them so they know how to take advantage of these things, whether it's gameplay or crafting or harvesting. They need some kind of a layout ahead of them, and we've got to provide that. So that's coming. I really have a lot of faith in the developers' ability to move things along, even though we get hiccups now and then. The progress is always there. So ending this video, I'm just going to show the context of skill training. You see here, I have no dust training whatsoever on this character, but it is available. So the 3 drop from that one tree was just with the 10% from the potion, the rune bind, which anybody can do. You can increase that considerably with this dust training. One thing to note is that not all skill trees or not all harvesting types have equal dust drop potential. So you see here wood, we've got 1 node that can be trained in each of these specialization lines. But grave digging has a lot more dust drop potential. You see it's a higher percentage, and it exists in the basic tree as well. When you add all these numbers up, you notice that grave digging is has a higher potential in terms of total percentage that you can reach, and the higher potential dust drop, which makes sense because dust does occur in graves. Makes sense. Okay, well, that's it for this Bloody Point. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.